Hi, friends. Welcome to week 4. This is lecture 2. So we are finishing our first half of Python. So our first half of Python is being finished now. And then moving forward, we will really start getting into the weeds. We're going to finish MySQL today. And then next week, we're going to start combining the two together. We're going to combine Flask and MySQL together. And we're going to start our full stack applications. Then the following week is week 6, where we are putting everything we have learned so far together to build out our full stack application. And then our belt exams will be starting. And so we are really starting to get there. Week 7 and 8 are way more chill. There are no core assignments for week 7 and 8. It is really just a time for you to either develop your skills and try for the belt exam again. We didn't want to overwhelm you. We want to give you those opportunities and chances. If that's being said, if you are ready to take the exam now, just let me know. I can get you an exam code at any time. It still works to where you have 3 chances. So maybe, you take it now and then you're like, oh, actually, I'm going to wait a couple weeks. Totally fine. But you do have access to that. There are 3 opportunities. So if you do want to take the exam code at any time, you just let me know. But officially, it'll start week 6. Just some housekeeping. As always, make sure you do your discussion posts. You have 2 of those. Make sure that they are done by the end of the week. Just as a reminder, there are no makeups on the discussion post. So there's nothing I can do if you miss it. Unfortunately, you just miss it and don't get credit for it. The 4 assignments you have are Dojos and Ninjas, the ERD. So just building basically what we built, this EER diagram, basically building what we did here. We're going to make sure we do that. Then we will just file. And then I think it was export as PNG. So all you do is upload this PNG right here. Then you've got books, same thing. I think I kind of did books for you, but that's okay. And then we have Dojos and Ninjas. This is actual queries, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to not focus on the ERD side. We're going to focus on the query side. And we have a fun query worksheet that we're going to do together. And then the last one is your MySQL. I put countries, but it's queries. Oh, no, it is countries. Good for me. That's there. That one's a little bit more challenging. And so this is one that I would encourage you guys to absolutely work together on. This is something that you can learn and build with one another, which actually helps me segue into my next topic. A couple of people on Discord had the brilliant idea, and I love it, of doing some pair programming, basically figuring out a time each week to you guys get together, either work on the same assignment or work on different assignments, but just kind of code together, kind of pick each other's brain. I think that's one of the best ways to learn personally. So if that is something you're interested in, I believe last time I checked, it's sometime on Saturday. But I'm sure that Peter and Dennis and everybody will put something in on the exact time that works for everybody else. Way to go, Tori. Way to bring it up. And so if you guys are interested on Saturday, I'm sure again, sometime in Discord, it'll be the same Zoom room. Or unless you guys want to make your own, it's totally up to you. But then you guys can get together. Speaking of Zoom room, I do want to point out we are in, obviously, if you're in here, you absolutely know that we're in a new Zoom room. Nothing crazy happened. I just messed up on my end. And so I had to create a new one. But there is a password. If you don't do that exact link, somehow if you get here, but you need a password, it is Python will, but there is just one L because I hit the cap of how many characters I could have. But that's in that email. You should have all gotten an email from me this afternoon that just let you know what the password was and the new link. Now, it is no longer on our Google Sheet for other reasons, but it is in Discord, and I will make sure that that's pinned up for us as well. Somebody asked in the chat, what happens if we don't pass by the 3rd time? Stack repeat? Yeah, absolutely. So you do have 3 chances to pass the exam. Unfortunately, if you don't pass, it will require you to repeat the class. Now, just as a reminder, you do get 1 free retake when you enter the program. If you haven't already used that, or if you didn't use that in Web Fundamentals, you do have that available for you. Obviously, I would like to do anything in my power to make sure you don't have to use that. Just because I want to make sure that you're learning this, right? And we still have 4 weeks. You still have quite a bit of time to really dive into this stuff. So that being said, as always, if you have any questions or you feel like you're getting behind, you feel like you're getting stressed, please reach out to myself or Mel. We're here to help you. We want to help you. We want to make sure that you are taken care of and you feel supported in that. Any questions on the housekeeping stuff? Yeah, Peter, the link of the Zoom, if you go by that exact link, it does put it in the you don't have to have the password. It just is passed in the information of the URL, I believe. Somehow. Cool. Okay, so I do want to dive in. Today we're going to be building this together. So it's going to be a little bit less of me. I'm going to teach some syntax and style, but we're going to just kind of dive into the material and kind of not learn together, but dive into the material and see, if we can figure this out together, which I think would be fun. So last class, we talked all about relational databases, right? And we all talked about, can anybody tell me anything about a relational database? Anything at all? Just want to see what. Go
Very
ahead.
structured.
Yeah.
So you so all those values that you have listed in there, you need them to be input by the user, taken in somehow.
Yeah. Can anybody remember what a row represents?
Row is an entry.
Yeah, it's like an instance, right? An instance of this book. Okay. Ethan, what is this publisher's ID right here doing?
So that is that's an ID that's able to connect in this relationship. I forget the two names of the IDs. Sorry, I'm still reading through, but I think that's a unique. Is that the unique ID or the other version of the ID that's linking to the other table? That looks like the unique ID, right? Because
so there's two. There's a primary key and then a foreign key. What do you think it is?
Thank you. I mean, look, it shows that it's linking, but the only thing that I see similar between the two of them is IDINT, right? So I assume that's the foreign key, and I assume
way to go.
Publishers is the unique key.
Absolutely. So this publisher's ID is what we call a foreign key. This is the value that is going to link this publisher's table with this book's. As we can tell here, we've got a one-to-many relationship, the many being on the book side, right? A publisher can have many books. Book can only be published by one publisher. You can tell because the little trident pitchfork thing is on, pointing towards this books. Way to go. I'm just going to start calling on people. Blake, what is the difference between varchar and text? This is a harder one. Blake or Dennis? You guys can put it in chat too. Yeah, way to go. Varchar is less character amounts. Does anybody remember what varchar's max is? 255. Wow, you guys are all geniuses. Okay. Well, way to go. Awesome. This ID is our primary key. Just wanted to make sure that we've got a text int. Cool. One thing I do want to point out before we really start getting going, there's a couple things. Make sure, because I had to delete my schema and drop my table like 4 times today because I had errors. Make sure before you forward engineer your tables, walk through each one, make sure the data type is what you want it to be, and make sure that your names or titles are spelled correctly and they don't look weird. What ended up happening for me is I accidentally had a space in one, which made it, and it is subtle, but it made it very difficult when I was querying. I had to work weird, which made me delete it. The other thing I do want to point out is this. If I'm creating something, let's say, I'm just going to say something, right? Here, I've got this data type. I can either type it in or I can use this dropdown. One thing I really want you to be aware of, if you are using this text, which is great, you can absolutely do that. Text, you can put so much stuff in there. By default, this text right here comes and it has these parentheses. One thing I want you to note is text can take in a parameter, right, of a limit, just kind of like varchar. It can just be way higher, but it doesn't have to. You can have it as a default. That's okay. Here, if I don't put anything in there, it automatically defaults to varchar. So if I want to do text, I have to delete those parentheses or I have to put some sort of name or some sort of value. So I would say, just be aware of that when you're doing text. I wasn't, and then I was trying to do my description and then it was too short and then whole thing. Also, another really important thing to say is that in your, whenever you create your ID, and every single thing should have an ID, right? Your authors, your books, your publishers, your authors has books doesn't, because it's just what's creating the two. It's not necessarily its own instance in a way, but all three of these do, because that's our primary key, right? Well, one thing we want to make sure is clicked is primary key, not null. And this AI. This AI stands for auto increment. That means for every instance, a new ID, it's going to start at 1, and then it's going to go all the way up to whatever, right? And however many instances you have. If you don't do this, you every single time have to pass in an ID. And that's really hard and challenging, because what if you pass in one with the same ID, then you have some sort of collision, some sort of bad data, right? And so make sure you click this AI, this auto increment, or this guy for your primary key. Cool. Any questions on this before we forward engineer it? Any questions on anything I've done here? If we're looking at what our, go
I
ahead.
got a question. I
Yeah.
noticed in some of the video tutorials that the guy leading the tutorial was putting the now function for the created ad and updated ad. Is that a best practice? Is it required?
You mean like right here?
Yep.
It's totally up to you. We kind of talked about this in office hour. I normally don't start with anything like this because I want you guys to understand really what's happening under the hood and with each instance. But I think over time, there is a couple ways. I know that Peter and Christiani came up with a couple ways to like auto update and auto, to like auto update if you wanted. Totally up to you. I won't be showing that because again, I like to show a little bit of the long way, but at the end, it's totally up to you. Speaking of which, thanks for bringing this up, Dennis, if you want to add a default value, you can do that here, right? In this default / expression, which could be that function of now. Or what I did was when books are sold, I have this default value of 0, meaning once a book is created, it maybe hasn't sold anything yet. Just sort of when I was thinking. We're going to see how that kind of plays a part whenever we are creating our new book. But you can do that as well. So you can put a default value. So if you wanted, let's say you only had one publisher, you could just put a default value of 1, right? And that's going to be the ID of that one publisher. But that would be a waste of transparently, that'd just be a waste of data, waste of space if you were going to do that. Cool. Great question though. But you totally can. That's an option for sure. Any other questions on this? Somebody did ask, can I change the name? I did have data in there. So if I did change the data, then it becomes a real big pain. Because then I either have to give a null value for all the ones that were in there that had some different things. So that's why I didn't just change it. It was easier, honestly, because I'm not dealing, obviously, right? If there is an error in a real world perspective, there's ways to fix it. But because I only was dealing with 1 or 2 instances, it was easier for me to drop the schema than go through the hassle of creating a default value for like changing the name or migrating or something like that. Great question though, Christiani. Sounds like you got a name as well. An option. Cool. All right. So what I want to talk about is now that we've done this, we want to actually do some queries, right? We actually want to deal with my database. The way we're going to do that is we're going to do something called forward engineering. And that is kind of one of the 2 things we're talking about today. But we're going to do some forward engineering. So what happens is I'm on my actual sheet that has my diagram. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to this database right here, and then you're going to click this forward engineer. Now I've already done it. It's already in my database, but I'll walk through it with you. And then before at the end, I'll cancel it. Here, it's going to take you to this. unless this is different, right? Unless you changed your port, which I wouldn't encourage you to do or anything like that, or you changed your username, this should just be very standard. You shouldn't have to touch this. It should be good to go. Then you can click continue. Same thing here. These are options you can do. You don't really need to touch anything. For what we're doing, you don't really need to touch anything. So you just keep clicking forward, right? Click continue. Then it's going to ask you for your password. And then you're going to say, okay, I want to export MySQL table objects. View is like if we already had a query and we have a certain, run that's, let's say we query for all the books in this one publisher, we can create a view of that. So I can just quickly return to that. That's just what a view is. But we don't need to do that. I can press continue. And then here, I just want to point this out is it is entirely possible to not use forward engineering and to create a database, right? By running this code, this is what this is doing. Forward engineering is creating this code, right? And then whenever you press continue, it is running that code in your actual MySQL instance and creating this database, right? Where it is create table if not exists, or the ID is int, not null, auto increment. Remember, those are the things that we clicked on, right? Where the name has a var char of 75, not null, et cetera, et cetera. If you're really interested, you can look into this. This is how you would create one. It's not really necessary, especially for what we're doing. Just don't mess with this, right? Don't go in and start changing this and being like, oh, I don't like this name. That's where it can get kind of messy. So once you get here, you should be good to go. And you'll just click this continue. Again, I've already done it, so I'm not going to do that. But you would just click this continue. And then so what will happen is, I want to get out of this, is once you do this, you can go over to your local instance right here. And then in your local instance, you can go, you might be on administration, go to schemas. Now, your schema might not show up. And before you do that, please make sure you do change your name here on this. Just click edit schema and then you can change the name. Or else you're going to have MyDB and that's going to get very confusing if you have like 5 MyDBs and you don't know which DB is for which, application or assignment. So please make sure you do change that. But what happens is after you forward engineer it, you come here and you click this refresh button, and then you should see your new database there. So here we have this books publishers, and this is my database, right? This is what was created. I've got my tables. I have my tables have authors, where all my columns, it has all my columns. If it has any foreign keys, it does not, right? But I can look at that authors table. If I want to look at authors and books, here's the different columns that I have, right? This one is a foreign key because, it is my foreign key. Here I've got my books and I've got my publishers. So cool. All of my tables are created. Everything's good to go. I now can start working and doing queries and manipulating my books or this entire database. Does that make sense? Are there any questions on the forward engineering piece? One. Okay. Cool. Well, what I was thinking of is really kind of talking about the syntax of what we're doing, but then kind of together walking through some of this material. So that way we can see exactly what is going on, and then we can see how we would accomplish these particular things in our, in our kind of day-to-day. Cool. So right now in this here, I have this query. You can do query 1. This is where I was just kind of messing around, but you can just create a query. If you need, you can say new query tab, and it creates a query tab for you. Here, I can make queries, which is I am going and getting or doing something. I'm manipulating my database in some way. We have 3 ways that we can manipulate, really, that we really kind of focus on for manipulating the database. And it's called our CRUD applications, right? I can create, I can read, I can update, and I can delete. Oops. Everything we do is really probably going to fall within these 4 things. I am going to do a lot of reading, and that's where we can apply filters or we can do some sort of thing. I can create something. So if I want to create a book, I can make a query to do that. If I accidentally put the wrong name for a book, I can update it. And if I want to delete a book, that book sucked, then we can just go ahead and delete it. This is the CRUD application that we really talk a lot about. And we're going to show you exactly how that we can do that together. So if I'm looking at this guy right here, we're in this MySQL queries section. Let me get my pencil out. We have talked about SQL. We've connected MySQL. Again, the way to do that is if you come here and then you have your MySQL connections right here. If you need to create that or edit it, you can right here. Again, this is what we showed whenever we did the Ford engineering sort of thing. So we have connected MySQL. Make sure that you do have to have MySQL, not just MySQL Workbench. You do have to have the server itself, but we've done that. Now what we want to do is we want to do some sort of basic queries together. One of the most basic ones is we are going to select something. Now, before I get asked this question, MySQL, you will always see SQL queries, not always, most of the time you will see SQL queries in all caps, right? Here you have select star from users. Does it have to be? Is it case sensitive? No, it's not. Is it industry standard? Yes. I would encourage you. It will work if you do all caps or if you do lower case, right? If you do no caps, it'll still work. I would encourage you to get used to doing it in all caps. A lot of people say the reason is because it's easier to distinguish what part is the SQL query and what part is the actual data itself. Just easier for other people to read. And secondly, is it is industry standard, transparently, right? And it's kind of a dumb standard, but it's industry standard. So we do it in all caps. So what this is doing is if I'm saying select, that is saying I want to grab all of the, something of something. So let's kind of look through what our first one says. I've got some books in my database. I've already pre-populated my database. I have some books. I'm going to show you how we will populate our database in here in a second, but I have some books in my database. If I want to do this, I want to select all books from database. I will type select. Now this star means I want to get every single column of the instance, all of them. It's going to go from ID all the way through updated app. So this star from, and then I say the table name. Now my table name, I've got authors, authors has books, books, and publishers. So I say the table name, right? And this one is case sensitive. So make sure that it is books. Once I write this select is saying grab all the columns from the books table. And it's going to grab every instance, right, along with that column. So the way I would run this is I click this little lightning bolt up here. And you can see this is what it returns to me. Let me pull it up a little bit. I've got 4 books. First one's called React. Description's a test. Second book is called Java, which tells you why Java is the worst. Third one is How to Be Okay at Flask. Mel and I created this one. This will teach you how to be decent at Flask. And then I have How to Be Okay at Python. It was the How to Be Okay at Flask was so popular. We had to do a How to Be Okay at Python. And so then, description is this will teach you how to be decent at Python. It gives me everything. If I were to look at my books, right, and my columns, I've got an ID, gives me the ID, gives me a title, description, all the way through publisher's ID. So which publisher it's associated with and how many books have been sold, right? That is another thing that I've added was books sold. So that is how I would select all from books. Now, this is great, but sometimes I don't want, I don't need the ID. That's not really a big thing that I need. So this one says select just the first and last name of authors. Okay. Well, my authors, and I like to, as I'm kind of dealing with these queries, I kind of like to bring up my columns and tables and make sure that I have everything right. What I can say is this, select. And then after the select, instead of doing this star, I can actually say every single column that I want to bring in. In this case is first name. first C name. And then after my first one, I separate it by a comma, last name from authors. Perfect. Do this. Oh, perfect. Now, if I run this guy, this is going to get me the first and last name of all of my authors. If I wanted to add in ID, I would just do ID here. And whatever order you put these in, that's what order it's going to show. So if I were to show this, it says ID, but if I were to put ID like this, then it should change that to where now its ID is on the end. Any questions on selecting? This is what we call reading from our database. This is the R for CRUD. Any questions on this? Cool. So I want to just kind of dive in and create some stuff and then give some time at the end to where we can do a little bit more challenging queries, right? And you guys can see either, we can kind of come up with them together or we can kind of filter them even more if we wanted to do that. But we're going to start out pretty simple by doing these selects, and then we're going to create, update, delete, do a little bit more. And then we're going to talk about joins, which is left join and join. It's probably the most challenging, but we'll get there. Okay. So the next one is create a new publishing company. So I'm wanting to create new data. Instead of create, we don't have a great create word. Instead, we use the word insert. So if I'm looking at this, right, if I'm looking at the platform, I can follow this to a T. So my keywords for MySQL are insert to, I give my table name, then notice that I give these column names right here, right? The columns that I am inserting to. Then I give it the values that I want to insert to those columns. I'll show you what I mean in just a second. Here, I'm going to say insert into. I'm going to say publishers because that is the name of my table. And especially when I'm inserting, I like to pull up the columns. That way I make sure that it is all good to go. Here, now I say the column values. Because we did ID and ID is auto incrementing, we don't have to pass anything through for ID. All I would just say is name, slogan. Now I do have to say, because I didn't do any sort of default value, created at, I do have to still put created at and updated at. Updated at. Perfect. So I'm inserting into publishers at these column names. Then the values are, what should my publisher be called? Anybody have an idea? Anybody got a good publisher name? Tori, what you thinking, bro? What's a good publisher name? Nah, Tori, what you got? Putting you on the spot, bro.
It's all good. No, not that. I was gonna say Louis Vuitton because that was a funny thing that happened in my past. You know what? Let's do that.
What is it?
Louis Vuitton.
How do I say it? How do I spell that?
Louis Vuitton, but then my name Torian. If you know how to spell Louis.
Vuitton.
There we go.
There it is. All right. All right. What's your slogan, man?
Oh, I'm supposed to have a slogan too?
Yeah. Yeah. You're a publishing company, man.
I don't know, something like maybe where good books are created.
Where, I like that. Where good books are created. Perfect. All right. Now, for this created at and updated at, instead of doing some sort of, figuring out every single time what the date is and then having to insert that, I can just do this built-in function called now. And what that'll do is that'll get the time at the instance that it's being created. And then it will use that value, this built-in method of now will just use the value at that exact time. And then it will store that in my database. Cool. So I've got my name, Louis Vuittorian, created at, or my slogan, where good books are created. My created at is now, my updated at is now. Now, one thing I do want to point out is if you, the correct way to do a query is you do your query and then at the end you do a semicolon. One thing I do want to note is if you don't do your semicolon right now, it'll probably work. But if you have multiple queries, right, I can do another query where I can say, select all from publishers, right? And then it's going to run it sequentially from top to bottom. And what it does is by having this semicolon here, it lets it know this is all one. And then this is the beginning of a new one, right? Or else it's going to try to think that it's all together. So get in the habit of putting the semicolon at the end. Don't just kind of get lazy with it and don't put it. But let's go ahead and run this. Cool. So I created Louis Vuittorian, where good books are created. Here's my other ones, coding creative, where you can do it. Dojo development, reading stuff. Humble publishing, you can do it and stuff. Chuck books, woof woof. Apple books are books are the most expensive. Cool. So I've got a bunch of publishers. I was able to create that. What happened is we created this. Then because it runs sequentially, after it was done, it got all of them. Now let's create another one so I can show you what happens if I don't do this. Let's see. William, because you got a good name, dude. Can you talk on a mic? William?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, man. What's your publisher name?
Let's call it Hastings.
Hastings. Oh, I love that.
Hastings Publishing.
Hastings Publishing. All right. What's your slogan?
Read a miracle.
Read a miracle. I like that. Perfect. Miracle. I got to spell it right. Okay. So now I am inserting, right? I'm doing the same sort of thing. I've ended my publishers. I'm inserting a name, a slogan I created at, and an updated at. The values that I'm passing through are Hastings Publishing, Read a Miracle. And then for the created at is now, updated at is now. Cool. So let's go ahead and run this. And now you can see that nothing happened, right? Something happened, but it didn't have that box. But if you look down here, it says insert into, and you see this green dot. I know that's like super small. But if you see this green dot, that tells you, okay, everything worked well. Everything's good to go. If I want to then see it, I can say, select all from publishers. Then PBLISHERS. Okay. And then if I say this, now you can see Hastings Publishing, because this is just me reading all the values. All I was doing here was inserting. So if we do want to, see both, you can just add this if you wanted, just to make sure once it's done, I want to make sure that it's in my database. Totally up to you. Any questions on this so far? Makes sense. Is this making a little bit of sense? Cool. Now, one other thing I wanted to do is just to show you that we can create a new book, right? And if I'm looking at my book here, one thing I want to point out is in my books, in my columns, remember that my books sold has a default value of 0, meaning if I don't pass in a book sold, so let's say I do this, books, and I say something like ID, not ID, but I say title, description, created at, updated at, publisher's ID. One thing to note is when you are populating your database, because I've got a foreign key, I cannot on this, because my books is on my mini side. It must have a publisher upon creation. I have to have something to go into my foreign key. So if I'm creating any instance on a mini side, make sure you've already created a publisher. Like I've already created that, right? But what I could do if I wanted to is I could do books sold and pass in a value. That would work just great. That would make sense. But if I remember from here, from looking at this guy, my book sold has a default expression, a default value of 0. So upon creation, if I don't do this, that's okay. And it's going to default to 0. That's the great thing about a default, right? If it does, if you do put it, whatever you put will overwrite it. But if you don't put it, it'll just default to 0. Cool. Peter, what kind of book? What book are we making, dude? We got a title, a description.
Oh boy. Title.
I'm gonna call it Peter's Planet.
Sure. There you go.
We're all just living in it. That might be too much, but that's okay. All right. Tell me a description about Peter's Planet, Peter. We are all peasants. Perfect. All right. Your created at is going to be now. Your updated at is going to be now. Your publisher's ID.
Let's do
Now-
6. I want it to come from Louis.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do 6. Louis, you got your first book, bro.
There
And
you
then
go,
how many
Tori.
books have you sold?
Oh, like at least 1 million copies, right?
All right. You got 1 million copies. Cool. So now if I insert book or insert into, I'm creating it. Again, if I don't do this, I can do this and this would run just fine because I have that default value. If you don't do that, then you have to make sure if it doesn't have a default value, you do have to pass it through, right? And, or unless it says that it can be null, right? If we say that it can be null, then it'll just say null. But here, let's make sure, I'm going to put it because he wants 1 million. We'll put books sold, but just as a reminder, if I have that default value, then we are good to go. Okay. So if I run this and then at the end, I'm going to say select all from books just so I can see it, right? And I run it. Perfect. Peter's Planet. We're all just living in it. We're all peasants. It's got 1 million copies, the highest gross, highest selling book we've had. And then idea 5, and it's attached to publisher 6. Cool. Any questions on creation, on inserting?
Yeah, so when you were talking about books sold and the fact there's a default there, what if, say, I'm doing my usual and totally forget to enter something, so I forget description, but that's checked not null. What would come back to me after I tried to insert it if I tried to leave a blank where it's not allowed?
Yeah, let's go try it. Best way to try to figure out something is to try it. So let's do this. Kevin, since you want to do it, it's your book, my friend. What should we call it?
Coding Barbarian.
Coding Librarian?
Barbarian.
Barbarian. It's a
Yeah, coding. You're thinking ahead of me.
coding juice recipes. Perfect. Okay, so our description is not null, right? And so if I do this and I don't pass that value through, then let's see what happens. I should get an error. Okay, it gives me this error down here. And it says error code column doesn't match value. And so by doing that, by me forgetting to do that, it does have an error here. Let's see if I deleted this. Let's see what happened. Because I'm wondering if it's catching that error. And let's try running this. Yep, still gives me an error. Field description doesn't have what it's trying to say is doesn't have a default as null. So it won't even let you put that in. It stops and it doesn't run any code. It doesn't let you put that in. So if you do have something set as not null, you do have to do it and it won't even let you make something without it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so basically a good way to make sure you're getting all the data that you want.
Yeah. Cool. So now if I do this and I run it, perfect. Now I've got coding barbarian, coding juice recipes, description, drink up. You are in the Louis Vuittorian, and you also sold 1 million copies. Congratulations. Now, one thing I want to be careful with is if I were to run this again, it will create a duplicate in my database. So please just be aware of that whenever you're running queries. Make sure you cancel them out or comment them out. Same way to do it is just the same kind of hotkey that we comment everything out with, same sort of thing. So make sure that you are doing that. Cool. Any questions on creation? Cool. Let's say I did go in and I want, let's say, unfortunately, Peter padded his numbers and he didn't actually sell 1 million books. It was more like 12. We need to update this value to 12. Let's see how exactly we would do that. So if I'm doing an update and I'm looking at this, sorry, Peter. If I'm looking at this, I can say update table name. So that's the table name I'm updating. I need to set, and then I can do one or all of them if I need to. Now it can get a little bit interesting because if I don't put this where, then it will update, will be applied to every record in the table. So if I don't put this where and I use this identifier, right, then it's going to say, okay, well, the user or all books now are 112. So Peter got everybody's books to be 112 versus us just updating to him. I'm going to just do Peter's. 12. Cool. So let's go ahead and grab his, right? And it does help right now because I have the IDs, which is what we're going to go off of. Now, I'm going to show you at the end how we could actually do this differently if we wanted to. But for right now, we can do this. Cool. So if I'm following the platform, it says to say update table name set. So let's do that. So I'm going to say update. And then my table name is books. I need to set where the books sold equals 12. Now, if I do this, all of my books in my database are going to have a book sold of 12. I have to identify which book I want to change, which book padded its numbers. So here I can say where. And as a reminder, what is our most unique identifier? It's my ID, right? So I can say where ID equals 5. So this is updating the books table where I'm setting the column books sold to 12 on the instance that has an ID of 5. So if I run this, and then I'll just do select all from books so we can see the difference. So if I run this, now Peter's numbers are normal. He only went to 12. Perfect. Does that make sense? If I don't do this, all of these would move to 12. And then I have to go in and update, and it would just be the worst. Any questions on updating? Oh, I got a chat kind of blowing up.
I do have a question, Will.
Yeah, what's up?
Let's just say, I mean, you have the actual table that exists in here, right? And the table kind of serves as, you know, the UI basically, for lack of a better description, right? If you went into the UI in this case and you actually overwrote the table, you know, and you dropped Peter's books sold from 1 million down to, you know, 100 where it should really be at. What would it actually do on the back end? Like, how does it adapt the code back here? Like, does it write new lines that override it? Like, how does that actually function?
So this is what's happening. So I'm going directly into my database. So this isn't a UI UX sort of thing. I'm manipulating the actual data being stored on my MySQL server.
I guess my question is there a front end that exists that's like graphic friendly? And if so, like the equivalent of Excel, for instance, right? And if you overwrote it, would it actually just write the code in the back end that now says update Peter's books ID number 5? Like, what is it
Yeah.
essentially doing the same thing in that example? Okay.
Yeah, so that's actually what we're going to be building when we go to our full stack is we're going to have a Flask server with some HTML, and we will be able to just click a button that says, edit this form, and then it's going to have a form, and I'm going to type in some information, and I'm going to click submit. On the back end, my Flask server is going to run these queries, but on my front end, my user is just going to see, if I wanted to implement a drag and drop, if I want to just implement a form, I can make it to where my user is just like, oops, needs to go edit this particular book, where I click on, maybe I have a list like this of books that are all hyperlink, and it goes to that book's particular page. And then I can click edit, right? And it's like, oh, they padded the numbers. Shame on Peter. Goes in and edits the numbers, and they press enter. That's all happening on the front end, but the back end is our Flask application is going to be connecting to our particular database and running this query, this particular query.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Hey, Will, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So you said if we forget that where ID equals 5 to indicate where we're changing that book sold to, it would change it on every instance. What if, so if we just delete that code, then wouldn't it go back to what it was?
No. So this is a query, and we are actively manipulating the data. So this data is stored in sort of real time, right? And so I don't have like a way to, if I delete this code, let's say I just do that and I run this query, nothing's going to happen. But if I were to go and say, select all from books, it's still going to have that information, right? It still has this as 12.
Gotcha.
And so this data is storing, this is persistent, right? This is the database that we talk about in, T-Mobile got hacked or whatever, their database that's just storing our information, our data.
Okay.
So whether the code's there or not, it is kind of proactively getting changed and manipulated a lot. Great question though.
So once you run the query, there's nothing down here you have to do to like save that. It's just the query's run. That's now changed. We're good.
Yep.
Okay.
Is there any way to undo that if you?
Yes. It is a long process. It's not an easy, like, oops, let's go back. Absolutely not an easy thing. That's why, there's a lot of horror stories when people first start that they accidentally dropped an entire schema, and then it's like not a good situation. There's not an easy way to kind of go back and do that. And there's some version controls. So like especially if you get in the cloud, there might be like a backup. And so you would have like a backup to where maybe you lose like a day's worth of information, but it's at least backed up 24 hours or 12 hours or whatever that is. But not that I know off the top of my head, just to like, boop, go back. So cool. All right. So I need to go a little bit quicker. So I just want to show you guys how to delete. We talked about, create, reading, updating, deleting. So now what I want to do is I want to delete the author David New. And so what I will do is go to my code here on the platform. And it's a very simple thing. Now, just note that if you can't delete at the beginning, you just need to run this code, SQL safe updates equals 0. And this is just a built-in kind of methodology from MySQL workbench that just prevents you from deleting stuff because it is such a pain in the butt to get it back, or to, maybe you potentially won't get it back. And so by doing this, it kind of bypasses those security things. Now, again, the same sort of thing from update applies to delete. If you don't put this delete pattern, then you will literally delete everything in your database, or that particular table, sorry. So make sure you do not do that. You will delete everything from the books. So make sure you are using your where. So what we're going to do here is I want to delete this author, David New. So here I'm going to say delete. If we look at the platform, it says delete from the table name. So delete from authors. And then I want to say where ID equals 2. And then actually want this to go the next line. Okay, so let's run this. And then after I run this, David New should be deleted. Perfect. David New is deleted. One thing I do want to point out is, do I create an author up here? No. Is when something is deleted from the database, you see that it still stays as ID 3 or 1, then it skips to 3, then it goes to 4. If I were to do something like this, insert into, if I could spell insert correctly. And then I say, I think it was first name. Created at, and then updated at, I think that's it, right? If I were to do this and I were to create a new one thing I do want to point out is that it doesn't backfill IDs. IDs are unique and they will always be unique. And if you delete something, it doesn't backfill it, right? So whenever I create this, it's not going to give this new one the ID of 2 and fill it in. It's going to give it the ID of 5. So if here I say Wesley cool. If I run this and then I select all from authors, you will see that when I actually create this and when this runs, Wesley now has the ID of 5 and this still stays. Nothing will ever take over at 2. Reason is because, well, there's a couple of reasons, but they want to make sure that they can prove that they actually deleted your data. That's like a big thing. And then backfilling can cause some sort of issue of merges. So that's why you never, it's never going to, by default, it's never going to backfill. It will always just incrementally go. Just something to keep in mind there. Now, we've got maybe 15 more minutes. So I really want to talk about these things moving forward. So our many-to-many, we have this many-to-many authors and this many-to-many authors and books, right? And when we talked about this, we've said that this authors and books is my table that creates my many-to-many relationship, right? It holds both foreign key values. So it does create that. So if I'm creating a many-to-many relationship, unlike my one-to-many, as we remember, whenever I created my book, I put that publisher's ID, right? And that established my relationship with that specific instance in that book. What I do is I say insert into my table that was created for holding that instance. So insert into authors has books, right? And then I'm going to say the values there are I think it's author ID and book ID. Book ID. And then let's say the values are author ID. Let's say Wesley. Peter, I don't remember what number your book was. I'm going to say 7. Wesley might have wrote 6. Okay, so Wesley, you wrote Peter's book. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm saying in this authors has books, the value for my author ID is the int of 6 or 5. And then the value of this book ID is book 6. That ID, remember, represents the ID of that book and the ID of the particular author instance, therefore creating this many-to-many. So if I were to run this, then it will create, we were not going to see anything, but it's going to create that. And so if I say select all from authors, has books. Or to run this, we can see that this first instance, author 5, is connected to book 6. That is a way that we create this many-to-many relationship. Any questions on this? Okay, perfect. Now we're going to go into joins. So let's say I want to show data from 2 different tables all at one, right? I want to get all that one data. We're going to do what we call a join. And so instead of me just getting, my publishing company, I want to see if I can show all books and the publishing company that they're under. And that's where we're going to talk about a join. Now there is a great video. In my opinion, it's probably one of the best videos for really understanding this stuff. And it's going to be on the join section. It's this first video. It kind of looks a little bit older, but it's this joining tables. It's a great one for talking about joins. And then we're going to talk about a left join and then group by. So I would really encourage you. I think it's like 16 minutes long. Absolutely go watch this, especially if joins after this don't make more sense. But what we're doing is we have got a one-to-many in the sense of we've got a one publisher can have many books. So let's go ahead and do that, right? Here you can see I want to join them together. Remembering that this publisher's ID is the same value as this publisher's ID, right? That's the thing that connects them together. So when I'm joining my books to my publishers, this foreign key acts as a gateway, as the glue, if you will, to join these 2 tables together. So what I can do is something like this. I want to do, let's see, where's my code? Cool. I want to do a join. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say select. Now, I don't really, let's start with select all, and then we can kind of move on from there if we want. But let's do this. We're going to say select from. Now I'm going to come from the publisher side, so the one side, but I'm going to show you how we can do it on the other side as well. So I'm selecting all from publishers. Okay. Where I'm going to join. So I'm taking this publishers table and I'm joining the books table on. And what this on represents is what is the mesh? What is the glue that is bringing them together? Well, we know that it is where the publishers, and that's because I'm coming from this publisher side, the publisher's ID equals, anybody have a guess here? What do we think? If we're looking at my books, what is my connector? It's this publisher's ID, right? This guy right here, right? Now, one thing I do want to note is because now we're working with different tables, we do have to give the table name before we just say the attribute. So up here, right, I'm just working for if I was like reading here, I'm just working with the author's tables, right? So I can just say first name, last name, and ID. Now, because I'm working with 2 tables, I have to specify what table will have this value. So I will say books dot publisher's ID, because publisher's ID is an attribute of books. So I'm taking this, I'm saying I want all the publishers and I want to connect that to all the books or to the books table. And the thing that's going to connect them together is where the publisher's ID matches books.publisher's ID. So if I run this, this gets me a table of all the books and you can see the publishers. So in this case, I've got, it starts with, this is my publishers table, right? This guy all the way updated at, and then you can see that it actually just brings them together And this is the start of my books table, right? I have joined the two tables together, but this doesn't look very good, right? I don't need my created at, I don't need my updated at. Maybe I just want my publisher's name, my book title, and my description, and maybe book sold. So if I wanted to do that, I could just say something like this: publishers.name. And again, the order you do this in does matter. I'm gonna say books.name, and it's the table name. So it's not like book.name, it's books, because it is a table of books. Books.description. And that's a books sold. Okay. So now if I run this, let's see what my table looks like. I've got in there error code column books name. Oh, it's books title. Sorry. Perfect. So now this is what it does. It's going to go in and it's going to say all of the instances where the publish ID matches a book's ID, right? Which is books dot publisher's ID, which is saying that there is a relationship. All of those, I want to join them together. And then it gives me this value to where I can say, okay, here's the name of the publishing company. Here's the name of, here's the name of my title, my description, and my book sold. But if I were to search and look at all of my publishing companies, I have more than 4. What if I wanted to show all of the publishing companies, and if they have a book associated, great. And if not, I want to show null. That is where a left join is going to come in. So I can do basically the same query, but if I say this left join, what this will do is this will grab all of the publishers, regardless if they have a book or not. So make sure I get all the publishers, and then it will also join together my books table to where I can see the title and description. So if I were to run this, now you can see I've got Hastings Publishing, or Humble and Hastings Publishing. They don't have any books. Apple Books has nothing, but they're still included in here because I just did a left join. So if I want all of those things, regardless if they do have a book or not, then I will use a left join. If I just want the books that have, or the publishing companies that have books, then I will just do a normal join. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? A join is me just combining two tables together and just remembering that your foreign key is going to be the glue that combines them together. So we want to make sure that we do that. If I were to do this from the other side, then I have one more query and then I want to be done. But I want to show you that I can do it from both sides. So let's say I did select. I'm actually just going to copy this one and we're just going to redo it. But I want to go through my book side just to show you that we can do it. I can still do publisher's name, books title. I can still do it in the same order, but in this case, I'm going to say from books, right? And on books, I'm going to join with publishers on. Now, because I'm coming from my book side, I will say I have to refer to the attribute on my books side. So this case, I'm going to say books dot publisher's ID equals publishers dot ID. Publishers. So if I were to do this again, this should show that just fine. Perfect. It showed it all. And then as always, if I wanted to have a left join, I totally can. I just wanted to show you. Oh, but this is just showing my books. So I don't have any books that aren't associated to a publisher. So therefore it doesn't show anything like that, right? All my books upon creation have to be associated to a publisher. So therefore I will never have a book that doesn't have a publisher. Any questions on joins? It's something that as we continue to do it, it makes a little bit more sense. But any questions on that? Again, just a left join is getting everything regardless if that relationship is there, in the sense of regardless if it has any books. versus just a normal join is only going to get the ones that have that relationship. Cool. The last thing I want to do is I've got two that are a little bit more advanced that I want to show you. And this one is get table of publishing companies and total number of books sold. So currently I've got all these different publishing companies and they have multiple books, right? And so if I were to just search, select all from publishers, and this is getting into the MySQL country. So I just wanted to do that. Not particularly that, my bad. If I were to do something like this, here you see I have Chuck Books a couple times. I've got Coding Creative. I got Dojo Developments, but I've got a couple of these Louis Vuittorian. I've got a couple of these multiple times. What if I just want to get it just one time and I want to get the summation of what, how many books in total have they sold? And on the bottom here, it's going to talk a lot about this group by. Now, there are certain things that we can do that are called aggregate functions that we can manipulate some data or manipulate some column to give us some sort of data instead of, having to do some math on some end. And we're going to use one of those right now. So what I can do, if I wanted to do that, I can say something like this. I want to say select. I just want to get my publishers dot name and my publishers dot slogan. Then I want to get a summation of books sold. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to use this aggregate function called sum. And the value I want to sum is books sold. So on the column of books sold, I'm first selecting all this information, right? I'm going to get it from publishers because that's where I'm going, because that's where I'm coming from. Now, because I want to get this guy right here, even if they have null, right? I want to get all of the publishers. I'm going to do a left join of books on, and then we're going to do that on, because we're coming from the publisher side. So say publishers dot ID equals books dot publishers underscore ID. Perfect. So I've joined them together. I'm doing a summation. Now what I want to do is I want them to I just want to have one instance of that. And that's where I'm going to say this group by, and I'm going to say publishers ID. Now what this publishers ID is, that is my unique identifier, right? I just want anyone that has the same ID. I just want to group it together into one row instead of having a bunch of different rows. So if I do this, then I can get an error. Publisher's name. Oh, publishers. Sorry. Now if I run this, now I get just each one time, and I get their total value, right? So Louis Vuittorian went from 2 million down to 1,012,000 because Peter lied. Then Chuck Books goes up, takes it for 1.3. We have Coding Creative, and these are all together. But now let's say I wanted to do it in some sort of order, right? I want to get it from the best to the worst, right? I can order it. Order by. Any guesses on what I'm going to order by here? I've got 3 options. What am I going to order by to see the best and the worst? Yeah, the sum, right? Where I'm going to say, I'm going to basically grab this guy. I'm going to order by this sum. Now, if I do this, this gives me from starting at 0 all the way to the highest. But let's say I wanted to start from whoever has the most down to the bottom. I can make this descending by saying DESC, meaning I want you to flip it, right? So if I flip it, Now it gives me a table with starting from the most down to the least of all of my values, even if there is null, because I did a left join. So if I did a normal join, let's see what happens. It just gives me the ones that don't have that only have instances and books attached to it. Make sense? Any questions? This is a little bit more complicated. Any questions on this? Peter asks, so left join avoids anything with any null values? No, left join's the opposite. Left join will bring in publishers even if there is a null value, right? So by me saying left join, it's going to give me all of the publishers, even if there is a null value. Join gets you a table only where there is a relationship, in the sense of where publisher's ID equals some books publisher's ID, right? It goes in to these tables and says, is there a publisher's ID of 6? Yeah. If that matches that, cool. I'm going to put this in a table. Left join allows for all of the publishers to be shown. Join only allows the ones with the relationship. Yeah. So normal join avoids. Great question. Cool. Last one I want to do is a little bit more complicated. This is probably the most complicated. I just wanted to show you how we could do this. This is get all books under the publishing company of Chuck Books and have sold more than 66 or 660,000 books without a join. So let's say I wanted to get all the books from a publishing company of Chuck Books that have sold more than 660,000 books without using a join. Here's how I could do this. I would say something like select. Here I'm going to say books dot title. I'll just do title and description. Books dot description, and I want to do books dot books sold. Cool. I'm going to get this from my books, right? Because I'm getting all my books. I'm not doing any sort of join. Now, I want to get the ones that are associated with Chuck Books without doing some sort of join. So what I can say is something like this, where books dot publisher ID equals. So I'm saying I want to get all the books where the publisher's ID, and what I'm trying to get to is Chuck's ID, right? The ID of Chuck's Books publishing company. Now, within this, I can have another query in itself, right? So I can say select ID from publishers where publishers dot name equals Chuck Books. So I'm saying I want to get all the books that are in Chuck's Books. And I'm saying that the thing that I'm identifying is this books.publisher ID, right? And where that ID matches. And then I have the SQL query that is just getting me the ID. So it's running another query within inside of it. So it's going into my publishers table. It's grabbing the ID where the publishers.name is Chuck Books. Any questions on that? Because that was kind of the biggest step here. Any questions on what I just did? I'm going in and I'm saying my identifier of knowing what books I want is my unique thing is I want to make sure that this ID matches Chuck's ID, but I don't have that handy. So I've got to run a query to grab that ID real fast. And whatever this query's value is, I'm saying where the book's publisher ID equals the value of this query, but we know that all it's getting me is that particular ID. So it's the ID of Chuck's Books. Then to do this condition, I say and, because I'm having another condition, books dot books sold is greater than 660000. Now, if I do this, this will get me the books from Chuck's ID that have an issue. Books.title, books.description, books.sold. From books, where publisher.id, select ID for publishers, where publishers.name. Oh, it's publisher's ID. Cool. So there's just one book. How to be okay at Python. This will teach you how to be decent at Python. Just one book does that condition. If I didn't have this and I run this, it's me 2 books. This one was at 650,000, didn't make the cut. Any questions on this, on these queries? On anything I talked about today? Cool. Well, just as a reminder, you do have some assignments, dojos and ninjas. We've kind of talked through and probably did most of the stuff today in class to kind of help you through this one. This MySQL countries is challenging. Just transparently, I did try to help you with some of those little more advanced ones at the end. These ones are some challenging ones. But what query would you run to display a total number of cities? Okay, we just did a query where we can use one of those aggregate functions. There's a great function called count that'll give you a total number, right? For each country. So we can utilize an aggregate function for that. Your country should return the name. Okay, we showed how to return a particular name and a total number of cities. Okay, so we can do some of this stuff. Again, I would really encourage you guys on Sunday, on Saturday, get together, work through this assignment. This is something that is going to be great and good practice. You will be using queries for the rest of the time here. So get used to doing that. The black belt exam the black belt exam does consist of more challenging queries. And so if you are going for that black belt, really make sure you understand this. You can use aggregate functions. You can use those different aspects. There are a ton of functions that are just kind of built in if we wanted. We did the .now one. Where is it? Somewhere. MySQL? Nope. There's a list of functions somewhere. Oh, it's probably on the tab called functions. There are some built-in ones. How we had the .now, you can do all kinds of different stuff. Or if you want to take in a value and make them all uppercase, you totally can. Lower, this is just in the function section. There's a lot of these great ones. So if you are interested, then here's some other functions different than those aggregate functions. So cool. Well, that's all I have for you guys today, friends. If there's any questions, I'll be here for a bit. And if not, then I hope you guys have a wonderful night and good luck on the assignments this week. Please, please, please feel free if you feel like you need to reach out to Mel or I. We are here to help. So please feel free to do that.